Hi, everyone. So, I've been doing some driving in the country and listening to some other channels. I was listening to Micah Curtis, and he's been roasting America, the series. I gotta say, I want America. As much as it drives me nuts that they're not giving up on America with Legacy Generations and they're doubling down on the failure of the SJW characters. Remember, SJWs always double down. That's one of the three Vox Dei tenets about them. My fourth one is that SJWs will always turn on you. But anyway, I was thinking about Gabby Rivera, and then I was thinking about a lot of this kind of searching out for all these like 22-year-old female assistant editors with like dyed blue or pink hair. And I was thinking about Robbie Rodriguez on Gwenpool, and I was thinking about all this, and I was like, that's it. Now, I think I might have touched on this point in one of my earliest videos, but the more I thought about it, and I actually pulled over at this nice recreated trail. I'm not going to show you a picture. So I experimented with something. Oh, here comes the train. It's the 7183 Union Pacific. Oh, this is going to be a long one. No, it's a Sunday. It looks like it's just empty. Anyway, I'm not stopping. The train doesn't stop. This video doesn't stop. I'm in Montpelier, Virginia. It's an old recreated train station. Anyway, on my last video, I thought the subject matter was so boring that I just included some pictures from a museum I went to today, and it was not popular. So, all right. I'm not Axel Alonso. I'm not going to fail at something and just keep doing it again. So I'm going to stick to comic book industry related stuff. Man, this is a long train. Anyway, the show must go on. So anyway, the thing I was thinking about is they keep going for youth by hiring youth or hiring people who think youthfully. And that is the big failure. The big failure of SJW Marvel, because Marvel started as a company with this train is still going of a company made by middle-aged failures. These were guys who did not want to be doing what they were doing. As has been said often, Stan Lee wanted to write the great American novel back when Americans read novels, back when writing a novel was a big thing. Man, this is a long train. Jack Kirby, you could tell he always kind of wanted to be in movies or animation, but he wanted to be bigger than what he was. In his 20s, he had been really big, so big that he was involved in some lawsuits. And I'm not going to speak on that because I can't. That's one of the things I can't speak on off the top of my head. But basically, he had been connected to a lawsuit over the original Shazam Captain Marvel. Anyway, Marvel, at its beginning, and actually all through its first couple years, was a company of middle-aged failures. And I'm giving this picture, and this is that's Stan Lee on the left, Stan Lee, Jack Kirby on the right, and this is them in the first couple of years of Marvel. And as you can tell, okay, so people used to age differently because people used to live differently. I go to jobs and I meet people who are my age, and I just kind of stare at them. I was like, in my head I'm saying, you look like a baby. You're like a 40-year-old baby. But people used to play outside when they were kids and work outside and be in the sun and get in fights and drink a lot and go to wars and go to boot camp and be outside waiting for, a bus in the cold. And you lived in a place that had bad heating and no AC. So people aged a lot faster than they do now. So this is Stan and Jack, and they're my age. They're my age. But they're not as old as they look. They're not anywhere near as old as they look. But the deal is, they were trying to make comics for essentially their kids. They had kids who were the age of the reader. And to that end, they understood kids. So comics was firmly planted towards kids, but they had the idea to tweak it up slightly to high school and college. Now, they did that by not writing it specifically for kids, but by making it kid-friendly. You can't hand any of the, Marvel comics from the 60s, all the way to the 90s, and have a kid, and there's anything inappropriate or there's anything they wouldn't understand. But they would touch on some deeper themes, a lot of the metaphysical stuff with Doctor Strange, attracted to like the hippie crowds. And the 70s, they really got into that. I think I'm gonna really get into the early 70s, like Jim Starlin stuff, because that's where like all the cosmic mythology of like Thanos, yes, I say Thanos, not Thanos, him, which is like being Adam Warlock, all this mythology that you're getting from the Guardians of the Galaxy movies. That's all stuff from like Roy Thomas and Jim. But again, this is Roy Thomas and Jim Starlin coming as a second generation after Jack Kirby and Stan Lee and all of their peers, guys in their 40s, World War II vets, whether it's combat or whether it's stateside. Jack Kirby was an infantryman who was actually evacuated for extreme cold weather injuries on his feet. Stan Lee was served stateside, and he worked in a unit of basically playwrights, and they would write little, Don't Catch VD, from French Girls type of films. But the core thing was that these were middle-aged men who had failed multiple times in life, who were not in a position they wanted to be, who had been in the military, who had been in street fights. Stan Lee had not grown up poor, but Jack Kirby definitely did. They were in the city. They were rough and tumble. Stan Lee was kind of like a little cad. His wife just passed away. Rest in peace. But his favorite story to talk about her was that she was a war bride, and he saw her and he just snapped her up from some other dude. That's a pretty salty move. That is not a microaggression. These are back in the days when someone would say step outside, and he came from that era. Now, they did try to appeal to youth. For instance, once Stan Lee found out about the college circuit, that's when he started wearing a toupee. So that's why you probably don't recognize this as Stan Lee. His hairline is on the top of his head. He started wearing a toupee in the 70s, and then if you wonder why Stan Lee has like the weirdest hairline you've ever seen, it's because he was actually like one of the first guys to get a hair transplant in like America. So that's why his stuff is just wonky. Whenever I see someone draw Stan Lee, it's like, you better get that crazy asymmetrical hairline exactly right, because that's Stan Lee. But again, these were middle-aged guys doing these. Stan Lee's literally wearing a wig so he doesn't look like everyone's dad when he goes to the college circuit. But they were in touch with them. So they were going out and they were listening. Stan Lee's big thing was, I want to sell comics. It was not whatever his politics were. I think he's basically like a lifelong Democrat, but he's from like an older, like a 1940s Democrat, which would probably be more like, I don't know, mainstream Republican. He had a life that was lived and a life that had a lot of dents in it and a lot of rough edges. Even though he grew up, well, and he was, kind of connected, so he did well in the industry. But these were guys who appealed to children and college age young people because these were the ages of their children and they knew how to connect with them. Stan Lee's daughter has a very warm relationship with both her parents. The Kirby kids are very protective of their father and his legacy. These are good, strong families, and this is what it came from. So then I look at SJW Marvel, and the thing, one of the really good things about Twitter is you can really get to know someone's life and the rhythms of their life. And I see all these SJWs, and I see these editors, and I see all these editors, and they don't have kids, and their life is just repeating stuff they saw online, and everything hurts them, and everything's painful, but somehow they're protecting the gentle forest creatures known as African Americans. but it's a fantasy world. It's not a real world. It's not a world. These aren't people who have ever gotten in a fist fight. These aren't people who have ever, had to like work manual labor. They haven't, gone to war. They haven't, been in a country. They haven't lived through a depression. So they don't have these great things. Oh, another thing is that, and this might be in a whole nother topic for a whole other video, they're not religious. The times that Kirby and Lee came from were very, very religious. Stanley and Kirby were both New York Jews. Comic books is basically as jazz is to African Americans from like the early part of the 20th century. That's what comic book is. It's basically a New York Jewish subculture, created, by New York Jewish people. So I wouldn't call anyone. I doubt either one of them was going to synagogue, every week. But especially if you follow Kirby's entire career, he was very much inspired by stories from the Old Testament, stories from the Torah, stories from Greek and Roman mythology. And these are things that, mythology and religion, these are kind of the same thing in many aspects. And this is something you grew up with. It was normal to know all the gods back then. This is called, reading the classics. You would read Odysseus. You would read the Bible. You would read the Torah. You had, common heroes, and you would build it all on these tropes. These are back when, the founding fathers, were basically real life superheroes. That's how they were portrayed. They were basically Supermen. They were American gods. So you grew up in this atmosphere of religion and mythology and history and rough life and getting in fights and being cold and being poor and going to war. And it created in them, it just bubbled within them, this ability to tell epic stories. And you don't get to be that at 21. You don't get to be that at 30 without having any of the experiences I talked about. The Marvel Universe could not have been created by 22-year-old girls with dyed pink tips in their hair who get offended by microaggressions, and they think a female Doctor Who is like the greatest accomplishment of the human race. It had to be people who actually saw real evil and actually did things about it. They didn't have to make fake, minor annoyances into evil. And they hate fascists. It's like, oh, you hate fascists? Why don't you just go join the army and go fight ISIS? They're like, oh, well, I got to finish my gender studies degree first and then do every other thing in the world besides doing that. So tell me what you think about this theory. I touched on it before, but tell me if you think that the main problem with Marvel is that they're hiring young people and they're focusing on young people without knowing about young people. One of the things I've talked about in other things is it's people without kids guessing how kids are, and they just don't know. One of the things that's very popular in progressive culture in the West is to be very against having kids when you're young, which is the time when you're supposed to have kids. That's where nature equips you to have kids. You don't have to pump yourself full of chemicals just to have one kid who has like 43 different learning disabilities when you're like 50 years old. But tell me what you think about this video. I didn't even notice when the train stopped. When did this train stop? Give me a time hack when the train stopped. Tell me what you think about Stan Lee and Jack Kirby. Tell me what you think about my theories. Can you not be religious and not be steeped in mythology and not have a rough life and still be a good writer of superhero or heroic fiction, which is what superhero comics are when they're successful? Subscribe and hit notifications. That's the little bell. It'll let you know right when my videos go up. Thanks for watching, and I'll probably have, I don't think I'm going to be seeing Spider-Man Homecoming today. It's probably going to be tomorrow. But I'll have a new comic review up. I think I'm going to do that Dark Metal, the casting, the DC event. I think I'll read and review that one tonight. Thanks for watching.